Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, UNRWA employees actively participated in the October 7th genocide and used UN resources to attack the Jewish state. A scathing report provided to the U.S. government lists the names of UNRWA employees who actively took part in the attacks when Hamas terrorists infiltrated the Jewish state and murdered 1,200 people and abducted another 240 others back to Gaza. A senior Israeli official confirmed that UNRWA staffers not only participated in the mass murders, they utilized UNRWA resources for the attacks. At least 12 UNRWA employees were named in the report. 10 of them are members of Hamas, and one belongs to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group. They were directly involved in the massacres and kidnappings, as well as the storage and distribution of vehicles, weapons, and ammunition for the genocide. The Wall Street Journal cited Israeli intelligence proving that 10% of UNRWA employees have ties to terror organizations, and around 50% have at least one close relative with ties to terror groups. Several nations have halted funds to the corrupt UN agency, which at the very least was complicit in the attacks on Israel. Yochanan has more on that.
Yes, Rebecca, a handful of countries have halted funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency after Israel proved the involvement of dozens of UNRWA employees in the October 7th massacres in Israel. The United States, France, Japan, the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, Austria, New Zealand, Italy, Australia, and Finland all announced cuts in their budgets to the notoriously corrupt Palestinian aid organization. UNRWA schools and buildings throughout the Gaza Strip have been used to stockpile weapons, and many of the terror tunnels built by Hamas have shafts underneath the UNRWA facilities. Former U.S. President Donald Trump warned of rampant corruption in the disreputable agency, and he cut funding to UNRWA in 2018. However, when President Joe Biden took office, he promptly reinstated hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to the nefarious organization, making the United States the biggest donor to UNRWA.
The Israel Defense Forces has killed or injured at least half of Hamas's terror forces in Gaza. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant visited the southern border and announced that a quarter of Hamas terrorists have been killed and at least that many have been injured. He told troops that despite this achievement, terrorism still exists in the Gaza Strip. Gallant reiterated Israel's goals to eliminate Hamas, to return all of the hostages, and to preserve the unity of the Israeli people. He said, "We are in a long war, but in the end, we will break Hamas." Much of the fighting has been concentrated on the Hamas stronghold of Khan Yunis, where the IDF has reportedly destroyed 2 of the Hamas battalions maneuvering in the area. Israeli forces are simultaneously operating above ground and in the massive network of tunnels constructed by the Iranian-backed terror group, where senior Hamas leaders have surrounded themselves with hostages.
3 American soldiers were killed and dozens wounded when an Iranian drone targeted a military base in Jordan. Iranian proxy armies in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Yemen have increased their attacks on U.S. military bases in the region, causing major damage and dozens of injuries. This latest escalation prompted tough talk from the White House. President Joe Biden promised a strong response for the deadly attack.
IDF forces operating in the Palestinian Authority-controlled city of Jenin have thwarted another major terror plot against Israelis in the Jewish heartland. 3 terrorists hiding out in the Ibn Sina hospital were killed in the raid, which was carried out by the IDF, Shin Bet, and the elite Yamam police unit. The terrorists were reportedly in contact with Hamas operatives abroad and were planning another massacre on the scale of the October 7th attacks. The IDF said that many terrorists were hiding inside the hospital and what it called another example of the cynical use by terror groups of civilian spaces and hospitals as cover and as human shields. Arab media said that Israeli forces entered the hospital dressed as doctors and secured the facility within just 10 minutes. No civilian casualties were reported.
Rampant persecution of Christians in southern Iraq has caused the population to almost disappear. The Kurdish news outlet, Ruda, estimates that 80% of the Christian population of Iraq has vanished. These indigenous Christians have a history dating back nearly 2 millennia. Today, they suffer unimaginable persecution by Iranian-backed jihadist groups who consider them to be infidels. Aram Sabah, the head of the Chaldean Archdiocese of Basra in southern Iraq, said many people in his community have fled the region due to violence, persecution, and death threats. He said Christians have a lack of rights and are treated as third-class citizens.
Anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish attacks in France have quadrupled. The Council for Jewish Institutions in France, or CRIF, said this spike in anti-Semitism is the worst on record. It noted that there were 1,676 anti-Semitic attacks last year, compared to 436 the year before. 13% of these acts of violence took place in schools. CRIF said that the number of anti-Semitic incidents in France following the October 7th attacks on the Jewish state equaled that of the previous 3 years combined.
Dozens of Israeli politicians were joined by thousands of protesters calling for the return of Jewish communities to the Gaza Strip. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, addressed 12 government ministers, 15 members of Knesset, and a crowd of over 3,000 people, demanding the Israeli resettlement of Gaza. In 2005, Israel forcefully removed more than 9,000 Jewish citizens, uprooting 21 communities in Gush Katif and 4 in northern Samaria. The disengagement from Gaza was meant to bring peace with the Palestinians, but this policy of appeasement only allowed the Hamas terror group to inch closer to the heart of the Jewish state. Hamas launched thousands of rockets into major population centers and built up its military infrastructure to wage war against Israel. Ben-Gvir said part of correcting the mistake of the Oslo Agreement, which brought on the October 7th massacre, is the return of Israeli communities to Gush Katif.
A new poll reflects overwhelming support for the Jewish state over Hamas among American voters. The latest Harvard Capps-Harris survey found that 67% of registered voters say that a ceasefire should only be discussed once Hamas is removed from power in Gaza and the remaining hostages are returned. 74% said that the October 7th Hamas attacks were genocidal, and 75% say that the assault cannot be justified by Palestinian grievances. 80% support Israel over Hamas, and 74% say that they believe Hamas would once again commit genocide against the Jews in Israel.
Southern Israel has become a blanket of red after the iconic Israeli anemones bloomed along the Gaza border. Just 3 months after Hamas terrorists infiltrated the Jewish state and killed 1,200 people, took 240 others hostage, and burned entire Jewish communities to the ground, signs of hope are reemerging and the scorched earth is beginning to blossom again. The red crown anemone is Israel's national flower, and during the winter it transforms the deserts into a carpet of red. Israelis traditionally flock to the south for the Dorom Adom, or Red South Festival, to experience the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy that says the barren desert will blossom abundantly.
A massive delegation of Christian pastors and Jewish rabbis descended on Washington, D.C. to demand congressional support for Israel. 3 months after the devastating October 7th attacks, Congress still has not passed a supplemental aid package for Israel, and members of this joint advocacy mission called for that funding to be approved. The group also called on Congress to renew its support for Israel as it simultaneously fights Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in the north, and other Iranian proxy armies in Syria. Jordana McMillan, the U.S. director of the Israel Allies Foundation, said this joint mission of Christian and Jewish leaders is coming at a critical time as Israel's war to eliminate Hamas continues. These leaders will be speaking out for those still held hostage and to encourage our members of Congress to give Israel the aid it needs to win the battle against evil. She said, "We have all watched the protests against Israel and attacks on Jews worldwide, and this faith-based advocacy effort reaffirms our nation's political leaders the breadth and depth of American support for Israel."
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned now for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is the governor of Benjamin. His name is Israel Ganz. Israel, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for hosting us.
Israel, tell us a little about where is Benjamin? What is Benjamin?
So we used to say Binyamin, it's Jerusalem suburbs. Binyamin located north to Jerusalem from the Dead Sea at the southeast, Latrun Junction between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and north to Rosh Ain, northwest and northeast, it's about Ariel. Judea and Samaria, the heart of the heartland, we are Binyamin.
So most of Judea and Samaria is in Benjamin, and we talk a lot about the north on our show with Hezbollah firing, and we talk about the south with Hamas and Gaza, but you also have security issues there as well. Can you tell us about that?
So we are the third front right now in the state of Israel. When we heard the missiles at October 7th, we understood that we are going to be attacked in minutes because we are surrounded by Arabs, and Hamas has people in all the places in Binyamin, in Ramallah, in their villages, and jihad and whatever. And we deal with terror every single day. And when we heard what happened in Gaza, we ran to the fences. Our first response teams were surrounding our communities. We bought rifles and whatever to protect ourselves.
You know, usually I'm used to seeing you in a suit, but now you're walking around with an M16 and a flat jacket and a walkie-talkie. How likely is something that happened in the areas around Gaza? How likely is that to happen in your communities in Judea and Samaria?
So since October 7th, everything had been changed. I have to be prepared and ready for any scenario. You saw me with my rifle. In past, we had terror attacks. In the last weeks, we had terror attacks, and terrorists came and blocked the road and shot cars. And every minute can be critical. So we must be prepared for any situation. We have our war room. And we have our security center, and we all ready for every scenario.
You know, we've seen reports that of the soldiers who are falling in battle, an outnumbered amount happen to be from your region. Is it demoralizing? Are people losing hope, or are people really ready for this big fight? Because we believe it's going to continue all year, maybe.
So unfortunately, we have the highest percentage of fallen soldiers in all of the state of Israel from Binyamin, because we have very ideological families. And people, when they hear the challenge, they run and fight. Even me, myself, I have two sons that fighting right now in Gaza, one of them in a very unique forces. And about 70 of my employees now fighting in south or north or in Judea and Samaria. It's very difficult for me to go to families to inform them that they lost their loved one. We have about 150 soldiers that had been injured. I have to visit them in the hospitals. Part of them lost their legs, hands. It's very difficult. It's very difficult, but I want to tell you, we have a very strong communities. When I go to families to inform them or to visit the soldiers, always I feel that I get power from them. Before I think I will help them, what I feel, they help me. Because they always help me. Please tell Prime Minister, they continue fight. Don't stop. We will never give up. You know, I meet so brave guys, so brave family with a lot of hope, and I'm sure that we will win this war.
You know, a lot of people in your community are men and women of faith. Jewish people believe that when they fight against the enemies of Israel, God comes into battle with them. How important is faith in this war against Hamas?
Without that, we can do nothing, because we were surprised. And we paid a so high price of victims, that people and civilians that fall in the battle. And I think the key for this battle is our hope, it's our beliefs that God stands with us. And there is a reason that we are in Judea and Samaria, in all the state of Israel, and specific in Judea and Samaria. We came back after a long exile, and we have a mission to develop this area. And this mission led us to continue fight against all the people. They're not fighting, we believe they're not fighting only against us, but they are against the world. They want us to give up and run away from Eretz Israel, the Holy Land, the heartland. We'll never give up. We have a mission, and we will do that.
You know, most of the people who watch the show are Bible-believing Christians who are men and women of faith as well. What can they do to support Israel during these trying times?
So, you know us very well. They can help us to strengthen our communities, to strengthen our defense on our community, to help the orphans, the widows, to help them, to hug them, to give them. It doesn't matter what. Everyone can help in his way. It can be flowers, it can be purchasing a ceramic vest, helmet, whatever. But we are partner. We have a common enemies, and we have to defeat them. And I think they can see, it's called Binyamin Fund. You will see our site, and you have all the details.
Israel, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
My message, we have a common war, a good war against evil. And together we must stand strongly, hug each other, and together we will defeat our enemies. I want you to stay in touch, to connect, see our website, the Binyamin Fund, stay in touch, and I can promise you we will stand here strongly and deepen our roots here in the heartland, and together we will defeat our enemies.
Thank you, Israel, for being on the show, and thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
The job of a United Nations refugee agency is to assist refugees from around the world so that they can have better lives and a true shot at success. But when it comes to Palestinian refugees, the players and the rules are different. UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, is the only UN organization that deals specifically with the Palestinian people, and they've been failing at bringing them out of refugee status for nearly 75 years. The United Nations defines a refugee as any person who is outside their country of origin for reasons of feared persecution, conflict, generalized violence, or other circumstances that have seriously disturbed public order, and as a result, they require international protection. The standard definition of a refugee usually applies to just one generation, but the Palestinians have a rare status. They are refugees for life, and their status as a refugee continues on for generation after generation. A Palestinian person can move out of the region and resettle, gain wealth and education, and still be considered a refugee. Even those Palestinians that have always lived in Gaza are considered refugees by UNRWA.
UNRWA is a dangerous organization that's whole purpose is to perpetuate the refugees crisis.
700,000 Arabs who lived within the British Mandate of Palestine were displaced following Israel's War of Independence in 1948. A year later, UNRWA was founded with the task of helping those refugees. 150,000 Arabs were given citizenship and welcomed under Israeli sovereignty. But most of the Palestinians rejected the premise of a Jewish state, and others were moved out of the territories that had been allocated for Israel. Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria signed off on the border agreement. UNRWA has spent the last 3/4 of a century turning the initial refugee population into a demographic 8 times its original size. Today, the UN estimates there are more than 5.9 million Palestinians with refugee status who live off what was supposed to be temporary humanitarian support. UNRWA operates in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, but none of these nations offer Palestinian refugees citizenship, choosing instead to keep the population living in camps. UNRWA operates with a staff of nearly 30,000 and a budget of about $1.2 billion. Only a few of UNRWA's staff come from other countries. The rest of its employees are hired directly from communities within the Palestinian territories. This financially bloated, inept agency has failed to resettle even one refugee. All of the refugees are handled by the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The role of the UNHCR is to rehabilitate and resettle them. UNRWA operates unlike other refugee relief organizations, and it's not clear exactly why. Most of UNRWA's work revolves around what they call education. Textbooks are filled with material that influences students to kill Jews through a violent overthrow. Other messaging directly expresses the false idea that one day Palestinians will remove all the Jews in the region. Maps in classrooms do not show the State of Israel in an effort to pretend that it does not exist. This type of rhetoric teaches young people to operate with hate instead of looking toward a future of coexistence. Many Hamas terrorists today were graduates of UNRWA schools. UNRWA has been condemned following accusations of serious ethical failures. Published reports highlight sexual misconduct, nepotism, rampant discrimination, and routine instruction of anti-Semitism taught to children. Infuriated by these scandals, the Swiss government and the United States stopped funding the organization in 2018 and 2019. However, when U.S. President Joe Biden took office, he reinstated and raised America's financial support for UNRWA.
UNRWA schools are used to store and launch rockets. UNRWA teachers praised the attacks on October 7th, and one even held an Israeli hostage captive.
UNRWA has no shortage of documented instances where staff members and educators praised Adolf Hitler, the killing of Jews, and the Hamas massacre of October 7th. During the IDF's retaliatory ground operation into Gaza, following the October 7th attack on Israel, they discovered numerous Hamas terror tunnels built beneath UNRWA schools. The schools were used to store weapons and ammunition. UNRWA is actively hindering the development and progress of the Palestinians and destroying the vision for peace. This is all part of a larger effort to ensure that conflict continues and that Israelis are driven out of their homeland as hinted to in UNRWA's charter. Up next, the IJC Report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Dear friends around the world, Israel is at war as of the 7th of October. Hamas militants, militias penetrated the border from Gaza to Israel. More than 1,300 people got killed in this vicious terrorist attack. The target of those attacks were mainly not Israeli army forces, but they were targeting squarely in each village they entered women, children, the elderly, and took many of them, up to 200 hostages, over to the Gaza Strip. Israel is going through an enormous crisis at this moment, and Israel urgently needs your prayers. We feel the Lord has called us to call forth a global prayer army to stand with Israel in this time of challenge. The spirit that manifested itself through Hamas is nothing else than the ancient spirit of Amalek that manifested itself through our history. Whenever Israel was at a crossroads of their life, the spirit of Amalek attacked the people of Israel. Amalek is a grandson of Esau. And we read that he inherited from rabbinical sources, he inherited the hatred of his grandfather Esau against the Jewish people. It manifests itself as Jacob was entering into the land of promise. He came out with an army of 400 to attack him. It manifests itself as Israel was just about to arrive at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, where God would come down in fire, where the rabbi said that was the moment when Israel became a nation. That's when Amalek attacked at Rephidim. It attacked King David when he was just about to become the king of Israel. In 1 Samuel chapter 30, it took his women and his children captive, like we witness it today, and it manifested itself in the most outrageous way in the time of Queen Esther, when Haman, a Amalekite king, was deciding to annihilate all Jews that were living in Persia. All those battles were won because people stood up in prayer. Jacob was wrestling with God the whole night. Moses, Aaron and Hur were on the mountain praying for Israel's victory. David was seeking the Lord, strengthening himself in the Lord, and was commissioned by the Lord to attack Amalek. And Esther called a 3-day fast in order to stand with his people, and God gave her the victory. Now I'm calling today the global body of Christ to stand with Israel at this critical moment. We believe that Israel is at an important juncture of their history. Maybe these are the days when God is going to pour out the spirit of grace and supplication over Israel. Maybe these are the days of Ezekiel 36, where it says, I will sprinkle clean water upon you. I will give you a new heart. I take the heart of stone out and give you a heart of flesh. I will fill you with my spirit. Maybe these are the days where God says in Ezekiel 37 that he will revive those dry bones, not just physically, but where he will breathe from the east, from the west, from the north and the south, his spirit upon them. I ask you to pray and to stand with us at this critical juncture in Israel history. Israel needs your prayer. Please join us. You can join us on a global Esther fast under the following link below. We would be blessed if we have as many people joining us. You will find more details on that. You can join us on a daily basis on a daily global prayer gathering, as with many believers from around the world and leaders from around the world. We strategically pray with Israel. Please also consider joining our 24/7 Rosh Chodesh Watch. All those links you see below how you can join, and please become an active part of this conflict that is unfolding right now in the Middle East. Israel needs your prayer. Israel needs your support. Please stand with us in this dark hour.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.